Hello, hello, hello. Great to see you all again. For those of you who I haven't met in the world of LinkedIn Live, my name is Daniel Rodic, and I'm the host of Founders Live here at Clearbank. And super excited to be chatting with the co-founder and CEO of ThirdLove, Heidi Zak. How are you, Heidi?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining. As we chatted about over email, and for those who are tuning in for the first time, this is a show that we're doing, a couple of times a week, profiling amazing founders and their stories. And it was actually very opportunistic that we moved this conversation to this week, because yesterday I had a conversation with Phil Krim, who started Casper, and ThirdLove started around the same time. And I consider you and Casper and a few others, Warby and Dollar Shave Club and so on, as this cohort of companies that really gave birth to the modern world of D2C as we know it today. And particularly in terms of how you raised your first round, I think you played a huge part in starting this revolution that millions of businesses are getting into. And so I'm super excited to get to that part of the story. But for people who are watching, I'll just put this banner on right now. If you have questions for Heidi, please drop it in the chat. I'll be paying attention, and we'll pull in your questions and comments as we go through it. But really, I'd just love to start with, where it all began. And I realize I didn't even put this in the questions, but even before we get to your time and your first official LinkedIn job, I'd love to understand, when you were growing up, what did that look like growing up? And, did you or your siblings or your parents have any kind of entrepreneurial tendencies or projects, like looking back, that might have been the seed? Or is this something you discovered later in life? I'd love to start there and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, I was not the kid with the lemonade stand or, the one selling something door to door. I think that wasn't me. Interestingly, though, my dad later in life, when I was in high school, actually bought his company and, from the owners. And so there was a bit of that in my family, but certainly nothing that I would have guessed at. If you would have asked me, even when I was 20, would I be doing this? I would have said no way.
So when you were growing up at the time, do you remember, whatever age is relevant to you, what you dreamed of when you were growing up? What was that job that you thought you'd be doing?
This is actually a very funny story because it kind of goes full circle. So, in I think like fifth grade or something, we had to write a book report, lined paper, like cut out photos from magazines of like what we wanted to be when we got older. And I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, or so I thought. And it's very funny because I was obsessed with Katie Couric, and this is when she was on the Today Show. And I just was completely obsessed with her. So the book report was mostly about her. Funny enough, coming full circle, she invested in our last round of funding. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know her personally, had dinner with her, have spent time with her. And I've told her all about this book report. So my mom needs to go dig it out so that I can show it to Katie Couric about how I wrote this for her, in the 80s or whenever it was. So
that's amazing. It's rare that you get to make your childhood dreams come true. So I'm happy that happened. I was watching pieces of that interview I think you guys had done together as well. I can't remember when that was. It was a few months ago or for last year. So that's amazing. So you ended up, checking off an early childhood dream. Jumping a bit forward in terms of your experience with your dad buying that business, did he try to loop you in at all to the business, or he just kind of, you were observing, he talked about it at the dinner table? What was your exposure to that?
Yeah, it was more just like knowing, I don't know. I always went with him to his office on the weekends. I'd help him open his mail and organize things. I mean, I always was really interested in just business, I guess, right? How you make money, how you build a business. And so that was something that always stuck with me for sure. But yeah, I mean, I ended up doing sort of more traditional career out of college, right? Where I did more like banking and kind of more traditional business roles. And then I really fell into being an entrepreneur. I truly did.
Yeah, no, that's how it is. I mean, I remember for me, my official first paying job was, I was an intern at Deloitte, but before that, my dad ran his own office business. And I remember my favorite job was we would have to, I actually have some paper here, like he would mail out stuff. And so my job was to take the pieces of paper and put them in packages. And so I'd race to see how many I could do so I could go play video games afterwards. But so you touch on your kind of first career out of college. It's at Bank of America as an investment banker. If I got that correct. What was the story that made you pick that as the? And I did a finance undergrad, so I certainly had that as a goal in my life when I was in college as well. But how did you land on that as the first step in your journey?
I'd like to say it was super insightful and I'd, done some really detailed analysis about it. But truth be told, what really happened was I really wanted to move to New York City. So I'm from a very small town outside of Niagara Falls, New York. That's where I grew up. It was a town of about 3,000 people. And I went to Duke undergrad. And from Duke, I really wanted to move to New York. And my parents were like, sounds great. Get a job where you can support yourself. So that limited the sphere of what I was able to do. So I had to look for something where I could make money to, live in the city that I wanted to live in at 21. And I started looking at consulting and banking and did a lot of interviews. And it happened to work out that I got an offer from Bank of America. And I luckily I prioritized the retail and consumer group. So I knew from a very young age that I really liked consumer products and retail. We'll remember, the list. I think there was 80 analysts. There was about 6 other women. So it was mostly men. And the guy who was sitting next to me had gone to Wharton undergrad. And thank God I got paired with him because I had a liberal arts degree. I barely knew how to use Excel. So you're talking, he was like my savior, still a friend of mine. And he really helped me than I did coming from, a very liberal arts focused college. And so, that's how it began.
You said you're still friends with
DCF, discounted cash flow, these things, right? So I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting, but yeah.
And so I'm always very fascinated about these kinds of stories. And, obviously Duke is a great college. It takes a certain degree of skill to become a banker without really a banking or finance. You stand out in the interviews thinking back of, why did they pick you to be part of?
I don't know. I definitely again, didn't have that skill set, but I think, I was prepared, right? I think I was I still am today, I would say. I don't roll into stuff and not, have done a lot of questions. You've done research. I think that, with a job interview is being prepared. So why do you want to work for a totally.
Yeah. So, if I could think of any, it's probably being a banker or 8 hours in, back then it's also building models on top of other things you need to do. So obviously you spent some time there, and what made you, what was the story of how Bank of America turned into Aeropostale?
So I went from Bank of America, did a short stint at McKinsey, and then applied to business. And so went to MIT Sloan. And so anytime, and I'm not an amazing salesperson, so people are probably way better at this than me, but the hook is and what you can do to maybe make a difference.
All about this. And so
we're talking way back. It was interesting because there was always this somewhat competition between stores and online. And I think that's what held a lot of companies back from really finding success, because who cares where the customer shops? We all just want to make the customer happy, right? And money and provide that service or the product. And so I think it went kind of awry for a lot of companies because it was a hard transition.
Yeah. Yeah. So the part that I really wanted to dig into is what you did internationally, and very selfishly, it's what I'm trying to work on right now here at Clearbank. Obviously, a different product, and so anytime anyone talks about international, I'm fascinated on how you got thrown into that, and I'm just curious if there are any memorable stories about that experience, because I imagine doing something in a foreign country, as I'm experiencing, is not easy and very fun to work on.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with international, and this probably would apply to you too, is that the best place to start is to look at people who are doing it really well, right? And that's what a lot of people in business do, right? You're looking at other competitors and seeing their strategies and how they've been effective, because I think there's a lot of learnings. You can get good and bad there. So, at this period of time that we're talking about, Gap was kind of the A+ player in international. They'd gone international, they'd done it reasonably successly. And so a lot of the work that I did at the beginning was really understanding sort of what was Gap doing and what were other players actually doing, why were they going to certain countries in certain orders, and what do each of those countries' agreements look like? So you can imagine, if you think about Singapore versus Dubai versus the UK, et cetera. And you start thinking about countries, how you operate, whether that's your own stores, a joint venture, a franchise agreement. There's a lot of different ways to operate. And so a lot of what I did at the beginning for the first 6 months was really just try to figure out what's the order of attack.
Yeah.
How would you stack rank these opportunities? What's the investment and risk profile? And then you really start saying, okay, now that we know we want to do this country first, who are these partners? Who would we, and then you start traveling a lot. I did a lot of international traveling.
Yeah.
And went to these countries, met a lot of partners. I mean, it was a really unique experience. I learned a lot.
Was there, out of all the places you visited at the time, what was your favorite or most memorable, get off the plane, you're like, wow, I'm here?
There's a lot of good ones. I mean, Dubai was very cool. I had never been to Dubai. I mean, it's the city that's kind of built out of the desert, right? And it's so modern. Everything is beautiful and big. And so that was cool. I mean, actually, when we were looking at the UK, we did a trip all over the UK, and it was really interesting to go like up to Manchester and kind of see different areas of the UK and just how different the populations are. I think as an American, probably silly American comment, I just didn't realize how like even diverse the population in the UK is, and dialect and everything like that. So there was just a lot of interesting learnings about who the consumer is. Like, is our brand even going to resonate there?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's even in terms of even what they wear and how does your pieces fit with what they're wearing. And I have the fortune of traveling to a bunch of different places as we were trying to expand my last company. And now, unfortunately, we can't travel. So I just observe people in their little Zoom boxes. So you have to fact find as you ask questions and stuff like that. So it's interesting to me because then you spent all this time at Aeropostale, you've opened up a whole bunch of stores, and that's a great experience. And then somehow you get looped into non-retail, with Google. And obviously, amazing company, great opportunity. How did that come about, that pivot from Aeropostale in New York / traveling around the world to Google? And at least from what it looked like, it wasn't as retail focused as your history has been.
Yeah. So great question. So basically I got married and my husband got a job offer from Sequoia Capital out on the West Coast. We were living in New York City and we were in our early 30s, no kids, like just had gotten married. And we're like, we're starting to do all these triathlons. Like we're doing tons of biking.
I love it.
Like people love this stuff in California. Seems like a great place to go for a few years. But, you just make these decisions. And
Why not?
We're like, why not? And I think in our heads, honestly, we're like, we'll probably go out for a few years and come back to New York. Like we were from the East Coast originally, both of us. And I don't know, you just assume that was 2010. And so came out here and I was working remotely with Aeropostale, like transitioning. And
you're an early pioneer working remote.
It's funny. I was. It's funny. I think they were trying to figure out what to do. And they had kind of said I could work remotely, but I was like, I get energy from being around people. And anyway, it wasn't the right long-term thing to stay there and work remote. Yeah. But I came out here and I had a few different opportunities. And, one of them that I was seriously considering was Stella and Dot. So this is in 2012 and they were about 30 people. And I think they had just raised around, or maybe not even. And they had a role they were building out international. So I could have joined and run and launched their international. So that was like very tangential to what I had done. It was an early stage retail startup, which was super interesting. And then I had this opportunity from Google, which was like the total opposite, right? Huge company, big tech company. When I started, I did have a role working with retail companies. So there was a bridge to that evolved within 3 months of starting there. As it happens.
Yeah.
Everyone. But yeah, so I basically had those two opportunities. And at the end of the day, I was like, I just want this tech experience. Like I had never had a big tech experience. And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do for a bit. And I joined Google and then yes, the role got morphed and I worked on a lot of things, but had a great experience and I wouldn't have traded that. I mean, selling that would have been awesome. I would have learned a lot too, but everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, you get to be part of an iconic company. And do you remember, this has happened, any company that is growing, even at the scale of Google, a few months in, how did they give you this new project or how did you jump onto this new thing that was not what you signed up for? What was that conversation like? Or did it just kind of sneak its way Because I've been part of both. So that's why I'm curious.
It's funny. I talk about this. I give this example, this little story at ThirdLove when we do employee onboarding, and it relates to change and getting really comfortable with change. Because if I can promise anything, and I always say this to people on onboarding, like I can sit here and tell you what I think we're going to do this year at ThirdLove and what I know we're working on, and what our initiatives are. But what I can promise you with 100% certainty is whatever I say right here, right now, in this moment, will 100% not be exactly what it looks like. That's what I can tell you, is that I'm 100% sure that there will be changes from what I'm saying today. Yeah. And there may be radical changes. There may be small changes. I have no idea, because that's called the life of the startup. And so you really need to get comfortable with change and ambiguity, and also just be okay with it and see it as an opportunity instead of as something negative. And so the story, as it relates back to Google and why this is so important, is that my husband had worked at Google in New York. So we weren't there at the same time, but he had gone through a variety of managers, a variety of roles while he was there after business school. And I came home. So that one day at work, we got called into a room. There was like 20 of us. And they're like, none of your roles, they didn't say it like this, but it was kind of like, none of your roles really exist anymore as they did yesterday.
Cool. Okay.
So we have new positions for you, but the org is totally changing and it's going to be different. And there's, all these things. And so we'll be doing individual meetings with you guys. And I came home from work and I had worked for more like traditional organizations, and I was spinning.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what is this? The whole thing. And Dave was like, this happens all the time at Google. Like you got to like settle, and like, it's totally cool. And change presents opportunity. Like, this is going to be good. You're going to find something great, etc. And I went back in the next day and I had a meeting with my manager, and we kind of talked about different opportunities, and I picked a different lane, and it was not related to retail companies, and it was a great experience. But I tell that story because when things like that happen, when people come and go, or managers change, or your role changes, or strategy, you want to see those as opportunities, not as disasters.
And so did they, in that one-on-one conversation, do you remember if they gave you a couple of options, or they kind of said, here's what it is, and you were excited about it? How did you end up finagling your way to doing whatever it is that you ended up being assigned to do?
I was proactive. So the first thing they offered me, I didn't love, and I wasn't excited about. And so I went and talked to the head of my group, and I said, listen, like, here's my skill set. Here's why I came to Google. Here's what I think I bring. And I don't know that this role is a good fit for either of us. And so is there something else? And she was awesome. She was like, she pulled out the whole like org chart, and there's like boxes, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and let's talk through some of these other things. That's awesome. And then I found something that was a good fit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So obviously, clearly, this trend of being very, very proactive in every single role, which probably doesn't surprise me why you ended up starting ThirdLove. And so you go through the Google, washing machine or whirlwind or adventure, however you want to frame it. But at some point, then you have in your mind that it's time to do something on my own. And I'm curious, when did the thought of maybe even just starting a company, and whether ThirdLove was the first idea, when did that even kernel of an idea come into your head? And maybe we can take the story from there.
Yeah. So I went to I started to just spend more time reading about startups and everything when I got out here and, in the community of San Francisco. And I went to a holiday party at a company called Zimride, which was the precursor to Lyft. And we knew the founders, and it was about maybe 30 people at the time. And it was in just like in a warehouse down here in Soma. And I remember showing up, and there was Costco pizza and a bunch of people coding. And I was like walking by. It was like late, 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Some guys were doing some stuff. And I walked by, I was chatting with them, and I'm like, what is Zimride? And they're like, oh, you can like share a car and get over the Bay Bridge with people. And I'm like people you don't know. And I just remember being like, this is not this idea. I don't know. But what was super cool was like, they were so excited about what they were building. And they were really like, no, we're going to like change the world. Like, we're going to this is, and I remember walking out of that party being like, that's really freaking cool. Like, they have so much energy around doing something new and innovative and changing the world. And for some reason that was like a moment for me where I was like, I kind of want to do something like that. Like, I think I can. Like, I don't know that I would have thought that about myself 5 years prior, but I was like, I think I can do this. And then obviously for me, it wasn't going to be Zimride, but it was probably something in retail and consumer. And I had this idea around bras because I saw a real opportunity, and that was the genesis of ThirdLove.
And I'm curious, before we jump to ThirdLove, were there any other? What was the second or third idea that you dropped? Because every founder has that. We have a lot of ideas and I have the share of like, yeah, those were actually terrible ideas, or other ideas are like, well, actually, you know what, that wouldn't have been as terrible to do either. But I just ended up picking whatever I ended up working on. What was what lost out to ThirdLove?
There was some, I've always loved food as an aspect too, and like nutrition. So I had some ideas on either like food startups, and this was like the days of like, I think it was right before maybe Munchery launched. It's kind of like that time period. But it was like food and or nutrition. And so I kind of went down some paths there. Food just felt really operationally challenging. And then nutrition, which I was really into. It's funny, I actually feel like some of these ideas work today, but I don't know that the world was like in the right place back then to be as, like wellness wasn't as much of a trend. Now maybe it would have worked out, but those were like some of the areas.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned food too, because one of our first companies that Ray, my co-founder, and I ran was a beauty subscription box company. And at one point before we moved to our next business, we were experimenting with a bunch of ideas, and we came this close to launching. And the idea was just off by like a degree in how we thought about it. It was launching a food box, but it was a sampling box versus like an actual meal kit. And we had an LOI with the Food Network in Canada to do something with them. And we ultimately just killed the idea because like, who's going to pay $50 for a box of like barbecue sauce? And we had to charge that amount for it to work. And looking back, and not to say we would have been good at executing on the idea, but had we even had the kernel of the idea of like, what happened if I just actually shipped you food? We have a great company here called Good Food in Canada. There's obviously Blue Apron and HelloFresh and so on and so forth. And it's funny how your ideas are just slightly off and could have been, a massive outcome. But that's why I'm always fascinated on those other ideas. But so anyway, so ThirdLove ends up being the idea that you run with. What's the first step that you take to okay, I'm going to do this? Did you quit your job immediately? Do you start working on it? What does the first few months look like?
Yeah, I think the first few months were more like getting the data. So really understanding the market, who was in the market, the size of the market, and trying to talk to, designers in the space and get a sense for like, how hard would this be, or easy could it be, right?
Yeah.
And then basically at some point realized it's a great opportunity, big market, no competition. There was people who launched before us, but they were all probably incubating around the same time. There was no startup in the space to name. Yeah, and to your point, there was like the Warby Guilt, and like Birchbox, probably. That was kind of the extent. I mean, D2C wasn't even a word back then. And so basically just said, well, there was no way to do it. I mean, I was taking a bus down to Mountain View every day, and so I had a 12-hour day at minimum, and it wasn't like easy enough to do on the side. So I just had to make that decision, and it was hard to leave Google. It's a great company, but just it was had to leave.
What do you remember? What the obviously the hours and stuff were adding up, but do you remember what was the thing that you had to leave to do next? Was it to go fundraise? Was it to just research the idea more? What forced your hand?
To get things going. So basically what we decided to do was to take a small amount of savings, bootstrap for 6 months, get some prototypes going. It was actually closer to 9 months, 6 to 9 months, get some, prototypes going and focus groups and things like that, and then go out and raise a seed. And so that was really the goal, to do that within the first year. And so that's really, but to do all of that, it takes time. And
it's not an evenings and weekends thing, especially when you're working a job where it's already pretty busy. And so, but I have an interesting decision you end up making, and I don't know when in the journey you make it with the product, is that there's no competition, and because it's quite hard, what you're doing is you've picked a business that has already a lot of SKUs, right? And then you said, like, you know what? Let me like double the number of SKUs as my competitive advantage with no capital and no resources. I'd love for you to explain why you did that, because it makes sense, but also doesn't make sense at all, because that sounds absolutely an insane choice to do as an early stage company.
I like this perspective. Maybe it would have been good to have you on my personal board of advisors when I was starting ThirdLove. Like, this really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think what was really important was making sure we solved the issues that we saw in this space. So the big issue around fit, if you think about like why do 80% of women wear the wrong bra size? Like why? Like what's the core of that? Well, there's a few things. One is most women either get fit and put into the wrong size and continue to wear it, meaning like
so human error, like the matching says you're this size and you're actually not, but you just follow the expert.
Exactly. And so like I went to a Victoria's Secret when I was however old. They told me I was a certain size. I wore that size. It never really fit. I never questioned it. And I only got my real bra size when I started ThirdLove, and it was different than that one. So like just like almost every woman, you have that aspect. And you tend to wear common sizes that people offer in store because that's what they have. And so it's like you kind of got to fit into the 20 sizes that are stocked in an average store, maybe. So that was one piece. And then the other was this idea of size. And like when we really started researching and testing, what we realized was like women are in between sizes. And that's how we came up with the idea of half cups. So it wasn't just a grandiose, like, oh, we're going to do half cups because it sounds really cool. It was like, no, we actually see when women try products on that there is this in between size that we should create. And so we felt like that investment in sizes, SKUs, to your point, inventory, if we could do it, would actually pay off in the long run with customer retention and customer happiness and better fit. And at the end of the day, that was why we had to do what we did.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Once you nail fit, then you take that entire lifetime spend on bras and shift it to you because you're the only one that fits, and then hopefully you innovate and provide more products to last. So, can you tell me a bit more about the technology and how did you? Because again, you're competing with either I just went to a store, someone told me that's the size and that's the size, and that's the best you got, and then you're doing it with no humans. You have to do it in someone's home. So let's stack more challenges on top of each other. What was the V1 of the technology that powers ThirdLove today?
Yeah, so we actually had an app. So this is the heyday of the app, 2013, 2014. The App Store was king. So we actually launched without a website. We did not have an e-commerce website. Most people don't realize this. When we launched, we had an app, and the app had sizing technology. So it leveraged computer vision technology so that we could try to predict a woman's bra size. Wearing a tight-fitting tank top and taking some photos into a mirror using her phone, which was the iPhone 3, I think, at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that was, the genesis of the fit technology that eventually morphed into our Fit Finder, which now has morphed into our fitting room, which we just launched a month ago, which is our latest version. But it's always been around helping solve that fit issue in a easier method potentially than getting fit with a real person in the room. So yeah, the fit technology has always been core to what we've done and a huge differentiator for us. Because it provides a service, right? It's a service that you provide to your customers in addition to the product that you create.
And so when you did the app as your launch, if I wanted to buy the product, I just bought through the app, or how did you, and you just fulfilled through because I don't even in-app purchases were a thing. Like, how did you do the transaction through the app?
Oh, we had built our own front end and back end.
Oh, great.
So very smart as well.
Who needs storefronts and payment processors and all that? We'll just do it full stack.
I still have PTSD from it. It was bad. So, but we had built our own front end and back end. So yeah, we had a 3PL. And so, you would do the sizing, you would shop in a reasonably normal kind of, environment on mobile and then buy. And shortly thereafter, we did also launch an e-commerce site as well, a website. Yeah.
And I'm just so fascinated about the computer vision technology. And so first it was the app where you take photos. Maybe you just highlight what are the stages? So what was the next, data inputs, and then what's the fitting room today, and what are you using now that you didn't have 7 years ago?
Yeah. So basically what we found is obviously downloading an app is a hurdle, right? It takes somebody a certain, amount of time and energy. And a lot of women thought the sizing technology was easy, but other women struggled because it wasn't just like snap a selfie, we tell you your bra size. There was steps you to follow that weren't are fine, but maybe not as user friendly as you need to be.
Especially if you're on your own, I imagine it's hard to take the right angles and stuff like that. Like, how do I prop up my phone? I need someone to take a photo of me. I have to get my roommate or my partner or whatever to do this for me.
Yeah, so it turns into it's a bit of an endeavor. And so basically that morphed into like, let's take some of these learnings and build the Fit Finder, which was more of a question-based system online and use a lot of that data that we had prior to help recommend sizes. So we had a lot of information on just data points on bodies. And so that's how we built the Fit Finder. And then this latest iteration of Fitting Room has 3D animations. It has more style questions. It's actually longer than our prior version. And it's much more encompassing of all the categories that we have today, which we didn't obviously have when we first started.
Got it. So yeah, you're building this underpinning to some very, you have all the data points are built, super customized fashion, and using lingerie as the base for that, which is super. I wish we could tackle a whole hour about that on its own. But before we skip ahead to some more interesting stories, the spoiler for everyone listening, at the time in 2013, you raised and I read a $5.5 million seed round, which was the largest round for a D2C e-commerce company at the time. And you did that mainly pitching to men who literally have no idea about any of these problems, which I think is going to be the hardest thing in the world to actually do. And I'm very simply, how did you do it? What was that process like? And how did you get people on side to eventually close such a massive round?
Yeah, I mean, the usual, I would say it's never, I always say this to the companies I also invest or advise, for most people, like 99%, like raising money is not super easy and it's stressful and you hear like a lot of no's. I think the idea of pitching and closing around in 2 weeks that you sometimes hear is few and far between. So it was a lot of meetings. It was a lot of no's. It was a lot of, the one question I remember getting all the time is like, will a woman actually buy a bra online? Like that was a big topic of conversation in 2013, because just nobody had done it. Nobody was proving that you could, right? And so, but you keep going and eventually you find it's like dating, you find the person who is the right match for you, who believes in you, who believes in the vision. And we were really fortunate to pitch Patrick Chung, who was at NEA at the time, and he just thought this was a great idea, and he liked us and he believed in us, and he gets a lot of credit for seeing something in us in this business before it was anything truly. Yeah,
that's amazing. And do you and this is obviously thinking back, do you know what part of your pitch or what part of your background do you think gave him that confidence to back you and lead you? What was the thesis that he agreed with you on?
I think it was basically like the fact that this one player owned 45% of the market in the US at the time, and how they sold and marketed the products and what they offered. If you really took a step back at a high level and looked at that, and that was like our thesis, right? And my personal thesis was like, why are women like, there aren't other options for women. That's why they're shopping there. Not because they like it, but because there's limited options. There's limited options. And so I think that was, that's really was the core belief was, and then it's like, are these, and this is how I angel invest too, like, are these people who, when it's getting really hard and they really want to quit, are they going to like figure it out and somehow get out of the valley of death that everyone experiences and make it to the other side? Like, are they going to find some water and get through it or not? And I think he knew that we would, and I think we've proven we have. And it's not always been easy.
Yeah. Well, you kind of hinted at some areas where I think that probably caused some stress as you built your own e-commerce platform essentially. So I'm sure that caused a lot of stress. So whether it's that or something else, were there the way I like to frame it is were any of these moments where you're like, oh my God, we're dead. Like this is over because this happened. And obviously that didn't happen because you're still around and thriving. But is there any stories that you remember of like, I wake up that night and be like, holy crap, like we're done, that are memorable to you?
Yeah, I mean, that for sure was one. I mean, we eventually switched to Shopify, and the earlier adopters, bigger companies on it. And I think we moved in like 2015, so a while ago. But yeah, I mean, I think beyond that, like manufacturing, we originally produced in Mexico. We were actually producing products on demand, another untold part of ThirdLove that nobody knows. That was another, I actually forgot about that. So another part of our pitch, which wasn't even just the pitch, it was actually was how we operated at the beginning, was this idea of no inventory. So this is important because it goes back to your point. Yeah. Yes, we were going to carry more SKUs, but we were going to produce on demand. So we didn't have inventory risk.
Wow.
What we came to find out very reasonably quickly within maybe 2 to 3 months of launching that was the quality and the time to produce was crazy. So meaning the quality was a lot lower. They were mixing wires and cups when they were, because there's too many parts going in, you have 30 components going into one bra. And the time to produce a made on demand bra was too long. And so we had all these issues with a made on demand line. And then we had to switch to a regular one. And so there was a moment there where it was like, are we going to be able to do this? And we lost like hundreds of thousands of dollars in that switch.
Wow. I mean, how do you even pay for that? Given the business was built on just in time, how do you actually pay for that inventory? Because you have to go find the money, right? Like we deal with it all the time. Our whole entire portfolio, like half our companies use Killer Bank's capital to pay for marketing or buy inventory. And so we always see the trends of, cash flow planning around inventory. How did you do that, given you didn't plan for that at all?
Well, we had raised around, thank goodness, to your like, kind of going back to what you were saying, like we had enough money that we were able to make a mistake.
Yeah.
We were very, very fortunate to have that extra cash to have made that mistake, because if we didn't, we probably wouldn't have survived that, honestly.
Yeah, I can imagine that's super stressful, but I imagine you had the reverse too, and maybe I'll frame it around customer acquisition, but really, were there any lucky breaks in the opposite direction that helped you move faster than you ever thought it would?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a lucky. Well, I'll call it a lucky break, but I think it was a thoughtful one, because it wasn't just something like, oh, a celeb was wearing us, and we sold 1 million bras, which would be awesome.
Yeah.
It happened.
One day soon, maybe.
Bras are a little harder. People just don't, just take these days they do more. Maybe. So we basically got to a point where we had figured out manufacturing. We had our best-selling bra, our t-shirt bra, and we were on a stable platform. And then we just got to this point where we have the product, but we don't have the market fit component, and we just weren't capturing enough customers. I was running our Facebook ads. I still remember our CPAs were like $350. This is before you could market on Instagram, right?
Great deal. Sounds like
great. Perfect. Yeah. And so, we just got everyone into a room and we're like, we got to figure out how to get women interested in trying this. Like, we know the product's great because women who try it love it and keep it and then buy more, but how do we get more women in? And it was a program called Try Before You Buy. We called it TBB. And why I think it was a lucky break was once we created that program and got it going, it was just straight up into the right. It was the right program at the right time that was super differentiated in the marketplace. And it just worked. It worked really, really well. And so without
your acquisition cost must have plummeted relative to that because you've de-risked it. And which is, it sounds like you discovered, looking backwards now, it's that was probably the biggest barrier of I've never seen this company. Most bras don't fit anyway. So, what's this, silly iPhone photo thing going to do for me? But if you tell me I can return it, no questions asked, then that's crazy.
Yeah. And we didn't make somebody pay for it. Right. So we de-risked by saying, we're not asking you for cash. You take the bra, you wear it. And in 30 days, if you like it and you wear it every day, which I promise you will, you'll pay the money for it because you love it. And if you don't, you send it back and we don't charge you. And so that feeling of we're standing behind, talk about standing behind product. This isn't even just you pay and free returns, right? We're just saying, don't even pay, just wear it. And then tell us how much you like it.
That's a key point. And I didn't realize that that's an important nuance. It's you actually didn't collect, you ship the product, they got to use it. And then you're not charging their card until essentially they don't return it to you. So if they return it to you, then you never charge them. But if they don't return it to you, then you charge them because obviously they liked it and used it. Wow. That's and I mean, this is a really dumb tactical question, but only because I know some of our founders have asked about it. Well, how do you do it? How do you manage like the credit card to make sure that you could hold on to it for 30 days and charge it?
Yeah, I mean, and you had things like credit cards expire or they their card maxes out. I mean, that happened. It wasn't at a high enough rate that it did, but certainly it happens. I mean, you have to follow up with people like, oh, we can't charge your credit card. Do you have a new one to give up? I mean, a lot of this was manual too. I mean, we were small at the time, and I mean, most people do respond, and then there's always a bit of fraud there, but that's part of. I mean, we all experience fraud doing business.
Yeah, just bake it into your acquisition cost, bake in the returns to the acquisition costs, and it all plays out. So looking back then of you running the Facebook ads to now, ThirdLove has been scaling over the past few years. How has growth changed for you in terms of a lot of people ask us about tactics, or like, what channel should I use? How should I think about TV? Should I just put all my money into Facebook? And I've literally heard every version of everything, which it's because every business is different. But in your lens, in your view, what are you paying attention to today, and how have you thought about structuring your marketing mix for the business?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, that's what's awesome about marketing is it's constantly changing. So you've changing platforms and environments, also coupled with a changing consumer and changing competition. So you have that triangle, right? That's constantly changing. And so I just think you just can't get too comfortable in what you're doing, and don't put all your eggs in one basket, like basics, like the marketing 101, and be testing. I mean, I think that's a big thing. So these days, it's much easier today to say we're taking 80% of our marketing budget and we're going to put it in things that we know work for the most part, we've done before, and take 20% and test, whether that's Snapchat or TikTok or, wherever else you want to go. TV, you can even test TV in smaller ways today than you ever could before. To me, that's very important because you want to be on the cusp of what's next. And if you can win that way, you have a real advantage. And I don't think a lot of people do that well. I think something works and then you just keep doubling down and doing the thing that works. I mean, we've done this too, absolutely.
Everyone has.
If it's working, why not? Why would I change anything? And it's like, well, it's working now, but at some point it's not going to work. Again, with 100% certainty, we all know that. So you want to be prepared. So I think just, always having that balance of new versus kind of tried and true is super important, thinking about your marketing mix.
And so for something, often I think the challenge I find a lot of founders I talk to have, like, let's use TV as a great example. It's maybe I want to test it, but like, I don't have the talent. Like, it's not work. Is it because like my creative sucked because like, I don't know how to run TV creative? I don't want to hire this TV person because it may not work. Like, so how did you make decisions like that? And I just pick TV. You can pick any channel that's relevant, but I would love to hear an example of how you thought through that.
I mean, it's so true. Look, the marketing platform is only as good as the copy and creative that goes onto it. And so if it's the wrong message or content for the wrong audience, then it's never going to work. So there's that component. That being said, I mean, that's why agencies are good, right? Agencies have expertise. SEO, affiliate, you name it. Like, there's agencies who know these verticals. They know what other people do that works. And they usually have in-house creative teams and or recommendations. And it's in their best interest for you to be successful because you're going to spend more money and they're going to make more money. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So and I'm a proponent of doing as much in-house as possible. Don't get me wrong, for sure. But absolutely, like when you're smaller, like partner with an agency, like learn from them. They are an expert, and then you won't be left holding the bag. And yes, no, you can go hire a TV person. Like
prove it out, make sure it's working, and then invest in it. I mean, it reminds me. I spent a lot of time with Jesse Horowitz, who started Hubble, and his strategy is the same. He's just like, hire agency. I remember the first time I talked to him, it's like, because there's also the human component too of like, you don't want to bring on someone and have them switch their jobs and do all that, and then it ends up not working out because they did anything wrong, but like your product doesn't have the AOV or the LTV to support investments in this channel, right? So, and as we're wrapping up in the last few minutes, I'd love to pivot to, we talked a little bit about what you're doing on the angel investing side and hinting at what kind of founders you like to back. And one point you mentioned here was, as you look at companies, you want to find founders and back founders that you think can survive that chasm of death, or multiple chasms of near death that every founder experiences. What are the questions you ask, or what are the things you look at that gives you some indication of if they have it or not?
I wish there was questions that I could give people. And if anybody else knows the answer, they certainly should email me and tell me what question, because I think it's very hard. I think a lot of it is about somebody's life experience. So I think you really need to understand like what drives somebody, and where they've experienced these challenges before. Because life isn't straight up to the right. And it's really about like, what do you do in those down moments? And that's not even work related, it's personal. And so I really try to get to know somebody's like course of life and what has happened if I can, and they're open to it, because I think that's insightful. And I think the other thing is just their passion around what they're building. Sometimes I talk to people where I'm just like not getting the vibe that they're super excited or passionate about their product or company in a way that's going to carry them through 10 to 20 years. And I think, Phil Krim is a friend as well. Like I can think back to meeting him here in San Francisco years ago. And, he was just so passionate and charismatic. Like you could tell he was like all in, and they were in it. And there's just something about being in it that kind of comes through, and it's hard to describe. And that means a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, as you mention it, there's given that people have all these different life experiences, it's probably some combination of I'm willing to run through walls for the right idea, and then for the other idea, like I'll just let it die. And so it's a combination of, have I tasted or seen the dark side of what I might getting myself into? So I know, and you have confidence as an investor that this person has seen it. But then it's also coupled with the idea of, even if I haven't gone through it, if I know I love it enough and there's nothing I'd rather do, then I will never sleep. I will, eat ramen, whatever it takes to make it happen. One more question on this, and then I love you mentioned something about triathlons, and I had this in my head to ask you because I love fitness. I discovered road biking as a passion over quarantine. From an investment perspective, are there certain sectors or ideas or things that are like just intriguing you that you're excited to learn about right now?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there's a ton going on in like femtech right now, for sure. I think it's a very interesting space that's finally getting the attention it deserves. I mean, I think there's also a lot going on more and more in sort of the over 50 consumer and products and experiences more tailored for that demographic. So I think there's like these certain, I call it almost like the unmarketed to or unlooked at consumers, like wherever they are. Everybody wants to sell to the 22-year-old, but the 60-year-old has a lot of money and maybe more time. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity I see more around that generally. But and I like so if you're ever out here, we can go out in San Francisco and go road biking.
I would love it. Yeah, I just got I was going to ask you what, if there's any gear or whatever you recommend, what's your latest fun purchase? I bought a Cervelo C2, which is very fortunate. Somehow I got it when all the bikes were sold out, but some bike shop had it. And so I've been riding. Funny enough, my longest ride I've done so far is from Toronto to Niagara.
Oh, cool.
Which is like a 120, 130K ride. And my dream right now is to see if I could ride from Toronto to Prince Edward County, which is our other wine country. Yeah. And so that one's like, if I don't stop, it's like an 8-hour ride. It's probably more like a 12-hour ride. And it's not a nice trail. So I'm like cautious. Like I talk a big talk. I don't know if I'll actually do it, but in my head, I really, really want to do it.
That's cool.
Yeah. But so what have you been doing for fun and how have you managed your triathlete Iron Woman career outside of that during COVID?
I've not done a triathlon in a while. I have 2 little kids, so that kind of went to the wayside. But I do really like fitness and do a lot of things. But I did buy a mountain bike during quarantine.
Oh, fun.
Started mountain biking a little bit. I'm more of a beginner mountain biker. I'm better at road biking. But yeah, I just think yeah, just trying to do new things and stay active and be outside and all of that has been super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my last question for you, and we'll wrap up, whether it's personal or business that comes to mind, is there anything that's on your bucket list that you'd love to do next, assuming the world is opened up and, back to some degree of normal?
Oh my gosh, that's like such a hard question. There's like so many things. I mean, I feel like I'm going to say what everyone would say. I mean, to me, it's really about traveling like freely again and just being able to like pick up and being like, hey, like I want to do whatever for the weekend and like get a last minute ticket somewhere and just kind of go and not have to like think through all the hurdles of doing that and planning. And so that's a big one. And yeah, I think just really connecting. I was talking to another founder who I hadn't spoken to in like a year just before this. And she had moved to Atlanta and from San Francisco and moved to the company. They're remote now. And I'm excited to see people in person, honestly. Like we're all just, I mean, I'm sure everyone says the same thing. Not very interesting.
But it's true. That's all it is. Nothing would make me happier than if I could just immediately fly out tomorrow to go on a ride with you in San Francisco and see all my friends in New York and do all of that. So hopefully very soon. Well, with that, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We have a couple of exciting episodes happening next week. I think we're finalizing a date. We're talking to the CEO of Barry's Bootcamp next week, which will be to run a gym during COVID. And he won Entrepreneur of the Year this year.
That's Joey.
Crazy story. Yeah, that's Joey. So, anyways, I'm very personally excited about that. I took off my Barry sweater. I'm saving it for next week. But Heidi, thank you again for taking the time, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon, whenever we can.
Let's bike.
Awesome! I can't wait. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, Daniel.